On the coldest morning that winter gave them, Elijah Boone opened his cabin door and found a pair of worn leather boots sitting neatly on the porch, still warm from someone's feet. Beside them, wrapped in his old cavalry coat, was a baby girl, sleeping like the storm hadn't screamed all night. No note, no tracks, just her. And those boots his boots, but not his doing. The sun had barely crested the ridge, casting long golden beams through the pine trees that ringed Elijah's cabin. Like silent guards, smoke curled from the chimney, soft against the still sky. The snow out front was unbroken except for one strange line of footprints leading to his door, then stopping, as if whoever left her there had vanished into thin air. Elijah stood frozen, for a long time, one hand still holding the door, breath clouding in the cold. He hadn't spoken a word aloud in 2 days, hadn't seen another soul in 5, and now there she was, tiny, quiet, unbothered by the wind that howled down from the pass. He knelt, gently lifting the coat. The baby stirred but didn't cry. She had a shock of dark hair and the softest little hands he'd ever seen. One of them clutched something, an old silver button, not his. He didn't know why that detail struck him the hardest, but it did. He said softly to himself, what in God's name do we do now? He carried her inside, set her in a crate by the hearth lined with flannel and straw. The fire still burned steady from the night before. He always kept it going, even when there was nothing left to warm but memory. Elijah hadn't always been alone. Years back, he'd fought in the war, then tried ranching, then tried love. All of it burned out in its own way. His wife, Cora, had been kind but brittle. She'd lost 2 babies in 3 winters. The last one took her with it. Elijah hadn't lit a candle in the church since he'd come here for the silence. Not out of bitterness but because the noise hurt too much. But now there was this baby. A girl, sleeping in the coat he hadn't touched in years. He fed her with a rag dipped in warm goat's milk, held her awkwardly, heart pounding. She stared up at him with impossibly calm eyes, as if she already knew the hard parts of the world and had chosen to be gentle anyway. That night, Elijah didn't sleep much. He sat in the old rocker by the fire, her tiny breaths rising and falling beside him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw boots in the snow, heard wind, wondered what kind of woman would walk barefoot into a storm and not look back. He named the baby Renby, 'cause that was the first sound he heard when the morning came again, a single bird, singing like the world wasn't cold at all. By the 3rd day, he rode into town. The sheriff's office was quiet, just old Marshal Coyle at the desk, sipping coffee thick as tar. You look like you've seen a ghost, Coyle muttered. Elijah just placed the silver button on the desk. Someone left a baby on my porch, he said, and I think they meant for her to stay. What do you think would make someone leave their child behind and choose that man's porch? Share your thoughts below. Where Elijah searches for the truth, but finds something he didn't expect. A letter from the past, with his name on it. It wasn't the sheriff who gave him answers. It was a creak in the floorboard back home. Elijah had returned from town with more questions than he'd left with. Marshal Coyle had squinted at the silver button like it meant something, then shook his head. Said he'd ask around, but everyone had been snowed in the past few days. No strangers through Rockbend, no missing women, no rumors. The silence was too clean to be true, so Elijah went home, found Wren still curled in the makeshift cradle, warm and pink-cheeked, as if she'd never known a world without firelight. He watched her for a long moment. There was something about the way her hands stayed closed around that button even in sleep, as if it meant safety or memory. He built up the fire, boiled more milk, then did what he hadn't done in years, opened the chest at the back of the cabin. It had belonged to Cora, her things, mostly, letters, old lace, a book of pressed wildflowers that had faded to ghosts, and that coat, his cavalry coat, the one the baby had been wrapped in. He ran his hand along the inside seam. The stitches were tight. His wife had always sewn like she was angry at the thread, but when his fingers brushed a hard ridge beneath the inner lining near the collar, something stopped him. He worked at it gently, and there, tucked between layers of old wool, was a small folded envelope, yellowed and thin as bark. On the front, in Cora's handwriting, "For Elijah if she ever comes back." His breath caught. She heard. He sat down, slowly, the wind rattling the windows as the storm picked up again. Wren murmured in her sleep. Elijah unfolded the letter. "I don't know if you'll ever read this, but if you do, then something I thought would never happen has." There was a girl, Before me, he never said much. I only knew from the way you looked toward the hills sometimes, like someone was still out there waiting. She came to the cabin once. I saw her through the trees. She didn't come in, just stood out there, barefoot in the snow, like she couldn't decide if she belonged. I didn't call to her. Maybe I should have. Maybe I should have asked her name, but I saw the way she looked at this place, like it still held pieces of her. If she ever comes back and if she's not alone, then Elijah, I hope you'll find the words I never had. I hope you'll forgive both of us. Some things break before they bend, but that doesn't mean they don't still grow. Cora. Elijah read it twice, 3 times. The fire crackled behind him, but he felt cold all over. There had been a girl before Cora, years ago, when he was still trying to build a ranch out of dead land. She'd come through one summer, helping a traveling preacher and his wife. Name was Letty, short for Violet. She had a smile that snuck up on you and a habit of singing under her breath. When she cooked, they'd sat on the porch one night, talking about weather and war and what it cost to start over. He'd thought about asking her to stay. She'd looked like she might have said yes, but the next morning she was gone. No note, no goodbye, just his coat missing off the wall peg, and no years later his coat had come back, holding a baby. Elijah looked at Wren, at her dark hair, that little freckle near her left eye. His hands began to tremble. Lord, he whispered, did she come back and leave her behind? The storm pressed harder against the cabin. Snow, sweeping sideways, but inside, the firelight danced on Cora's letter, and Wren stirred again. Her eyes opened, deep and clear, and for just a second, Elijah could have sworn he saw Letty in them, not the girl she'd been, but the woman she must have become. The storm let up by noon the next day, leaving the woods around the cabin quiet. In that eerie way fresh snow always does, like the whole world paused to listen. Elijah sat by the window, staring at the silver button Wren still refused to let go of. She clutched it like it was stitched to her skin, like the sound of its clink against the wooden floor would be enough to undo something deep inside her. He didn't know what to make of the letter, or the baby, or the way the past had found him, in the middle of nowhere, not with a knock, but a child in his coat and boots, still steaming on the porch. But if Cora had written those words, if she had seen that woman return after all those years, then someone else must have. 2 dots. So he packed up Wren in a sling made from his old scarf and saddled the mule. Not the horse. He didn't want speed. He wanted quiet. He headed east, toward the old widow Delaney's place, nestled at the edge of a frozen meadow past Pine Hollow. She'd once taken in boarders, cooked stew thick enough to mend heartbreak, and knew every soul who'd passed through Rockbend before the war and after it. 2. She answered the door before he even knocked, wiping her hands on an apron, her grey hair pulled back in a tight knot. Elijah Boone, she said, eyeing the baby bundled at his chest. I was wondering how long it'd take you. He blinked. You heard. Didn't have to, she said, stepping aside to let him in. You've got her eyes. Elijah hesitated. You mean Letty? She said simply. She came through last spring. Stayed here 3 nights, looked like hell, but still smiled like she owed the world kindness it hadn't earned. Said she was heading west, never said where. Asterisk, she poured coffee and set out bread without asking. She didn't say anything about a child. Delaney gave a soft shake of the head. No, but she sang, every night. That little tune she always used to hum. Remember it? Elijah nodded, slowly. The one about the willow bending in the wind. That's the one, the widow said, her eyes softening. She sang it while brushing her hair, like she was singing to someone she missed, maybe someone she hoped would remember her. He felt a tightness behind his ribs. She didn't ask about me. She did, just once, asked if you still lived near the ridge. I told her yes, but that you'd gone quiet. Said you buried your wife and never quite came back. Elijah looked down at Wren, now asleep against his chest. Maybe I didn't have reason to. Widow Delaney studied him for a long moment, then reached into the drawer beside the stove and pulled out a folded scrap of parchment. She left. This told me if she didn't come back, and if someone brought a baby asking questions, I'd know who to give it to. Elijah opened the notes slowly. If you found her, then maybe I did one thing right. I couldn't stay. I had to keep moving. But she was never a mistake. She's the only good I ever made. If I'm gone for good, tell her I sang. Tell her I watched the snow and thought of her, and tell her he was a better man than I ever was, brave enough to be. V.L. No full name, no date, just those lines, and the faint smudge of what might have been a tear, or snowmelt. She loved you, Delaney said gently. I barely knew her, Elijah whispered. Maybe, she said, but you never forgot her. That counts for something. He left before sundown, wren stirring as the wind picked up again. As they rode, Elijah found himself humming that same willow tune under his breath, a soft, bending thing. It wasn't a lullaby exactly, it was a promise, a memory, a bridge between two people who once sat on a porch and almost chose each other. Now he had the child they never spoke of. He stopped by the creek that night, let Wren stretch in the snow-dusted moss. She opened her eyes, stared up at him like she already knew this song. He touched the silver button still in her fist. Your mama, he whispered, was a girl who ran, but she looked back, and I reckon that's more than most ever do. He didn't know where Letty was now, if she was alive, if she was still running, but he knew this. The baby wasn't abandoned. She was entrusted by the time Elijah rode into town again. The spring thaw had begun to loosen winter's grip. Snow still clung in ditches and shady corners, but the ground had started to breathe again. Mud splattered the mule's legs as they passed the old mill road, and Wren tied snug to his chest, kicked her tiny foot now and then, as if she could feel the earth waking up under them. He headed straight to the small white chapel at the edge of town. It had once been a schoolhouse, then a town hall, then abandoned for 10 years until Pastor Tilly came back from war and declared it sacred enough. Elijah hadn't set foot inside since Cora's burial. Now, he needed a name, not for himself, for her. He tied the mule, stepped through the creaking doors. Inside, dust swirled in beams of pale morning light. The wood still smelled of pine and candle wax, and sitting near the front pew, hands folded like she was waiting for him, was Miss Alma Greer. Elijah stopped short. Alma looked up slowly, her silver hair pinned back in a tidy braid, a black shawl around her shoulders. Elijah Boone, she said, not surprised. Is that the child? It is, he said carefully. She rose with quiet grace and came closer, peering down at Wren. The baby blinked up, curious, then gurgled. She favors her mother, Alma said after a long pause. Elijah felt the hairs on the back of his neck prickle. You knew Letty. Knew her well enough, Alma replied. She stayed with me for a short time, before she left town, helped in my garden, sang when she thought I couldn't hear. Her eyes met his cool and sharp. I didn't think much of her then, thought she was too soft, too dreamy. But people surprise you. She left this child on my porch, Elijah said quietly. No note, no name, but I think she meant for me to keep her. She did, Alma said, voice almost kind now. She told me so. Elijah froze. When the day she left town, she asked if I believed a man could raise a girl gentle, even if his hands were rough. I said no, not really. Alma glanced toward the window, but maybe I was wrong. She moved to the old baptismal book and opened it with practiced fingers. If you're here, Elijah, then you've decided. I have, he said. I want her baptized. Official. Legal. Have you chosen her name? I call her Wren, he said, because she came with the snow and sang without sound. Alma looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. That's a name worth keeping. She dipped her hand into the old pewter bowl, and Elijah stepped forward, cradling the baby as if the act itself could shield her from everything he couldn't understand. As Alma began the prayer, the church door creaked open behind them. Footsteps. Elijah turned slightly, heart hitching. It wasn't Letty. It was Clara Tilson, the mayor's wife, a woman known for her sharp tongue and louder whispers. And behind her, a young deputy Elijah didn't recognize. Sorry to interrupt, Clara said, voice sweet like syrup left too long in the sun. But I heard there was a naming happening this morning. Thought I might offer guidance. Elijah stiffened. I didn't ask for any. No, she said, smiling thinly. But the law might. She stepped closer, her eyes narrowing at Wren. Words gone round. Baby dropped off with no papers, no mother, no marriage, no witnesses. Some folks think she ought to be sent to the mission orphanage until it's sorted proper. Elijah didn't move. She has a name, she has a home. She's not going anywhere. Clara's eyes glinted. Unless someone contests it. That's when Alma Greer, without looking up from the book, said, then I'll sign as witness. Clara blinked. Excuse me. I knew the mother, Alma said calmly. I'll testify she entrusted the child to Elijah Boone. You can tell that to your judge friend in Tucson. Clara's mouth tightened. This isn't over. No, Alma replied. It's only beginning. When they left the church, the town was quiet again. Birds chirped on the chapel roof. Elijah walked slowly, Wren resting easy against his chest. You didn't have to do that, he told Alma. She glanced at him sideways. I didn't do it for you, he smiled. She always did have a way of softening the sharp edges, didn't she? Still does, Alma murmured, touching Wren's tiny hand. Still does. The man didn't knock. Dottie stood at the tree line, just past the cabin, one hand resting on his hip like he was trying not to reach for something gone. Flask, memory. The sun was low behind him, turning his silhouette to shadow. But Elijah could see the scar clear across the man's left hand, burned deep, old, familiar. Wren was asleep in the rocker, bundled in that same coat. Elijah stepped off the porch slowly, one hand near his belt, buckle not threatening, just ready. Can I help you? He asked, though he already had a bad feeling about the answer. The man nodded once, slow. Name's Elias Crow. I reckon you knew her as Letty. Elijah's throat tightened. I knew her. She talked about you. Back when she trusted people, said you were the only one who saw her quiet without trying to fix it. Elias walked closer, his boots crunching in the patchy spring snow. He moved like a man who'd spent too long watching for trouble. His coat was worn, buttons mismatched. Dust clung to his shoulders like it belonged there. I didn't come to take the baby, he said, voice low. I came because I made her a promise, and I failed her. Elijah didn't say anything, just studied the man. The way he avoided looking toward the cabin, toward Wren. She came through Elkhorn 5 months back. Elias went on. She was trying to get to the Colorado line. I offered to ride with her part way, help her cross the passes before winter locked him down. You her kin? Elijah asked. No, his voice cracked. I was something worse. I was a friend, a real one, and I let her go when I shouldn't. V.A. The scar on Elias's hand caught the light, and Elijah's eyes lingered. She saved me, Elias said quietly. Pulled me from a fire 3 years ago, a barn gone up fast. Folks said I should have died in it. She was there, shouldn't have been, but she was. Said she couldn't watch something burn and do nothing. Elijah felt a cold ripple crawl down his back. She said something the last time I saw her, Elias continued. Said if anything happened, and if I ever found her again too late, I was to give this to you. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of canvas, worn, soot-stained. Inside was a small drawing, a baby, nestled in a coat, next to a single line of handwriting. Elijah knows how to hold silence. He'll know how to hold her. Elijah swallowed hard. His knees felt suddenly unsteady. Do you know what happened to her? He asked. Elias nodded. She died in December. Cold took her. Somewhere past Pike Ridge. She never made it out of the canyon. Elijah closed his eyes. Snowmelt dripped from the eaves like soft tears on the roof behind him. He had hoped, deep down, despite the silence, the boots, the letter, he had hoped she'd appear again, not like a ghost, but like a woman ready to stay. She didn't leave Wren because she wanted to, Elias said gently. She left her because she knew she wouldn't make it. She wrapped her in your coat because she wanted her wrapped in something good. They stood there in silence, 2 men carrying the same woman's memory differently, one with fire, one with waiting. What do you want from me? Elijah asked finally. Nothing, Elias said. But I want to stay a few days, if you'll let me. Not in the house. Out near the creek, just to see she's safe, that she's with someone who knew her name. Elijah looked toward the rocker, where Wren stirred, one hand reaching for something in her dreams. Maybe a face, maybe a voice, singing about willow trees. You can stay, Elijah said, but don't lie to her when she's old enough to ask. I wouldn't dare, Elias said softly, and that night, the fire in the hearth burned steady. 2 cups of coffee sat untouched on the table, and outside, under the stars, a man with a scarred hand kept watchnet for danger, but for a promise finally kept. Have you ever carried a promise you couldn't keep until life gave you one last chance? Share below, where Wren's first fever threatens everything, and Elijah must decide whether to trust the town that once turned its back on him. It started with a whimper, not a cry, not a scream, just a small sound from the cradle near the hearth. Elijah woke before dawn, fire down to its last red glow. The cabin was cold, and the sound was soft, but it pulled him from bed like a gunshot. Wren's skin was too warm, her cheeks flushed deeper than they should have been, her breaths coming fast and shallow. Her fingers trembled when he touched her forehead. The silver button she always held had fallen to the floor. He muttered aloud, trying to steady his voice. "She's burning up." He wrapped her in a blanket, held her close, paced the floor. Elias, sleeping out by the creek, didn't hear the door swing open, but he heard the mule Dot. By the time Elijah was halfway to town, Elias had caught up beside him on horseback, eyes wide. "What's wrong?" "She's sick," Elijah said. "Fever's taken hold. Doc's 10 miles west. He won't ride out in this thaw. You'll need Miss Lila." Elijah cursed under his breath. Lila Everett, the town healer, midwife, and sometimes prophet. She was also Cora's cousin, the woman who'd once told him he had no business raising a child when he couldn't keep a wife alive. But none of that mattered now. They thundered down the muddy road as the sun rose, steam rising off the mule's flanks. Wren didn't cry. That was what scared Elijah the most. She just breathed faster, her eyelids fluttering like something inside her was trying to escape. They reached town mid-morning. Elijah didn't wait for permission. He pushed straight through the doors of Lila's little yellow house near the schoolyard. The bell above her door clanged loud enough to wake the ghosts. Lila appeared from the back, sleeves rolled, apron already stained from something green and herbal. "Elijah Boone," she said, blinking, "and here I thought you were a myth." He held Wren out without a word. Lila took one look, then snapped into motion. "Lay her by the stove. Get that blanket off. You," she barked at Elias. "Boil water." Elijah hovered uselessly as she pressed cool cloths to Wren's chest, uncorked dark bottles, whispered things under her breath that sounded more prayer than prescription. Her hands were sharp, her voice sharper, but her eyes, they were soft as mountain moss. Hours passed. Elijah sat in the corner, arms limp, eyes fixed on that little form wrapped in borrowed blankets. The fever didn't break, but she held on. At sunset, Lila finally spoke. "She's strong," she said quietly, "but she's been traveling too long. Not enough meat on her." "Who's her mother?" Elijah hesitated. "She was someone I once knew. Name Letty," he said, "short for Violet." Lila's hands stilled. "Elijah," she whispered, looking at him like she was seeing him for the first time in years. "You mean Letty Hawthorne?" His jaw clenched. "You knew her. She came here once, sat right where you're sitting now, holding her belly, said she wasn't staying long, but she left a letter for someone. I kept it, didn't know who it was for." She got up, opened a box from the top shelf, and pulled out a folded paper. It was addressed to whoever stayed. She said. Elijah opened it slowly, heart thudding. "If someone is reading this, it means I couldn't stay. I didn't leave her because I didn't want her. I left her because I knew he would. He was always quiet, always steady. I knew she'd need that more than anything. If she falls sick, remind her she was born of firebutt, meant for light. Tell him thank you for being the home I couldn't give her." He folded the letter, tucked it into his coat near his chest. "I never got to say goodbye," he said softly. Lila looked at him for a long time. "Maybe you don't need to. Maybe all she needed was for you to stay." That night, Wren's fever broke. She whimpered once, rolled toward the fire, and sighed. Elijah fell asleep sitting up, hand resting on her back, as if afraid she'd disappear like the woman who'd brought her here. The cabin door was open. Elijah knew something was wrong the moment the wind hit his chest, cold and bitter, like it had come from some older, crueler winter. He ran the last 20 yards, Elias just behind him, mud spraying from their boots. The mule, still tied to the post, stomped nervously and snorted, but made no sound. Inside, the fire was dead. The kettle had boiled itself dry, and Wren's cradle sat empty, the quilt folded neatly inside it. No crying, no overturned chairs, no struggle. Just silence and one muddy bootprint by the hearth, sharp-edged, not his own. "God," Elijah whispered. His hands trembled as he reached for the coat she had been wrapped in, still hanging on its hook. Untouched. Elias scanned the room, eyes sharp. "This wasn't random." "No," Elijah said. "Someone waited till we were gone." He turned toward the door. Snow had melted mostly, but there was enough left on the north side of the cabin to catch a trail. One set of footprints, small stride, light step. Someone careful, someone carrying weight. Elias crouched to study the track. Heading toward the canyon ridge, Elijah's throat went dry. That was where he and Letty used to walk, where they'd once carved initials into a pine tree and watched the valley bloom far below. He mounted the mule without thinking, reins trembling in his fists. If he's hurt her, then we do what has to be done, Elias said grimly, but not with anger, with truth. They followed the trail through fading snow and brittle spring grass, over dry creek beds and past wind-worn pines. The sky above shifted from cold blue to smoky gray, clouds dragging over the ridgeline like regret. And then, near the edge of the bluff, they saw the man. He stood with his back to them, Wren in his arms. She was calm, awake, looking up at him with quiet wonder. Elijah dismounted, heart pounding. "Turn around," he called, voice low but sharp. The man did. He was older. Then Elijah remembered. Short beard gone gray, shoulders stooped slightly, but the eyes hazel and haunted were unmistakable. "Joshua Kane," Elijah muttered. "Didn't think I'd see you again." "I didn't come for you," Joshua said softly. "I came for her." Elias's hand twitched toward his hip. Elijah held up a hand. "Let him speak." Joshua stepped back from the edge, cradling Wren gently. "She's my niece," he said. "Letty's brother's girl." Elijah froze. "Letty never mentioned a brother, because I failed her. I left when we were kids, ran off to chase gold and glory, came back years too late, found her grave, found her story, and I swore if I ever found the baby, I'd try to make it right." He looked at Wren again. "She's all that's left of our blood." "She's not yours," Elijah said. "She's hers, and she left her with me." Joshua didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply walked forward, placed the child back in Elijah's arms, and looked him in the eye. "She called you a good man," he said. "She told people you'd never lie to a child, never leave." Elijah blinked, the words hitting harder than expected. "I just wanted to see her," Joshua whispered. "Hold her once, and tell her I'm sorry." Wren curled against Elijah's chest. Her hand reached up toward his collar, searching for the coat. Or maybe the man who had become it. "You could have asked," Elijah said. "You didn't have to break into my home. I didn't know if I'd be brave enough if I waited." For a long time, the three men stood on the bluff, the wind pulling at their coats. Then Elijah nodded slowly. "You want to make something, right?" he said. "Come back with us, help raise her, not as a father, but as family." Joshua looked stunned. "You'd let me? She deserves to know where she came from. All of it. Even the pieces we'd rather forget." Joshua's eyes filled, but he only nodded. And they rode back in silence, three men, one child, and a world slowly beginning again under their feet. They say trouble doesn't knock twice, but Elijah knew better. Sometimes it circles wide and comes back wearing a different face. It was late afternoon when the stagecoach rolled into Rockbend, dust curling behind it like smoke from a slow-burning fire. Elijah stood outside the general store, Wren strapped to his chest, her head tucked beneath his chin. Joshua Kane leaned on the hitching post nearby, sleeves rolled up, as if hard work might somehow balance the guilt still lingering in his eyes. Neither of them noticed the woman step down from the stage until her boots hit the ground. Black leather, polished, laced tight, like she didn't believe in softness. She wore a dark traveling dress, hair pinned up under a wide-brimmed hat, and she carried a satchel full of papers. Not clothes, not gifts. Papers. She saw them almost instantly and walked straight toward Elijah without hesitation. "Elijah Boone?" she asked, her voice clipped and Eastern. "Not from around here." "I am." She reached into her coat and handed him a folded document. "My name is Rosalind Avery. I'm here on behalf of the Santa Fe District Court and the estate of Violet Hawthorne." Elijah's jaw tightened at the sound of Letty's true name. Rosalind went on, cold and precise. "There is reason to believe that the child in your care, male, approximately 6 months, no recorded birth certificate, is the biological daughter of Ms. Hawthorne and, by extension, the legal property of her named guardian, myself." He stared at the papers, the heavy seals, the ink so dark it looked like it had been written in grief. "You're claiming she belongs to you?" he asked. "I'm claiming I have authority," Rosalind replied. "Letty was my cousin. She and I were raised together in Santa Fe before she ran off. I've spent the last 3 years trying to locate her." Joshua stepped forward, bristling. "And now that she's dead, you come to collect what's left of her?" Rosalind didn't flinch. "I came to protect what remains of my family's name. That child has no legal status. She wasn't baptized in state, isn't registered. By territorial law, she could be taken and placed in orphan care. Elijah held Wren tighter, heart pounding beneath the linen sling. She's not an orphan, he said softly. She's home. Rosalind's gaze shifted to the baby just briefly, and for the first time, Elijah saw something flicker there. Not cruelty, not even ambition, but fear, deep and buried. He lowered his voice. Why now? Why her? Rosalind took a breath. Because I couldn't find Letty in time. Because she died before I could tell her that I was sorry for letting her go. Because she left a note in her journal, one line. If I don't make it, some would make sure she doesn't grow up invisible. And I didn't know what that meant, until I found the button. Elijah froze. What button? He asked. Rosalind reached into her pocket and pulled out a twin to the one Wren clutched in sleeper silver disc, with a horse carved into it, worn smooth on one edge, polished by worry. She used to carry it when she was scared, Rosalind whispered. Said it reminded her of a man who once looked at her like she mattered. I thought it was nothing, just a trinket. Elijah's voice cracked. She left the other one with Wren. For the first time, the lawyer's posture softened. I don't want to take her, she said, but I do want to protect her. And if you're the man Letty trusted, then you need to make it official. You need to fight. He stared at the document in his hand. Fight. File for guardianship. Register her name. Get a judge to sign it, here or in Santa Fe. Otherwise, the law could pull her from your arms the moment you blink. Wren stirred against his chest. Rosalind looked down and reached out, slowly, gently. Her hand brushed the baby's head like someone reaching across time for forgiveness. Then she stepped back. I'll give you a week, she said. Then I have to go. And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving behind the scent of ink, of choices, and of a woman who had once been lost to both of them. Elijah looked at Joshua, who had no words. Then he looked at Wren. I'll do it, he whispered. Whatever it takes, I'll give her a name that no one can take away. The courthouse in Rock Bend wasn't much to look at, just a tour-room clapboard building with cracked windows and a crooked sign. But to Elijah Boone, it might as well have been a mountain. The last time he stood in front of that bench, he'd been 25, still raw from Cora's death, accused of a crime he didn't commit, failing to stop a barn fire that killed 3 horses and nearly took a child. He'd been cleared, eventually, but not forgiven. And now, all these years later, he was back not to defend himself, but to speak for someone too small to speak at all. The judge was Thaddeus, Renly, a stern man with a sunken face and a memory like barbed wire. He sat behind the desk, tapping his gavel not out of necessity, but habit. You're asking me, he said slowly, to grant legal guardianship of a child who isn't yours, wasn't born here, and has no surviving mother, and you don't even have proof of paternity. Elijah nodded once. Yes, sir. You got a letter? I do. Witnesses 1. The judge raised an eyebrow. That man outside, Joshua Kane, thought he left this town in disgrace. You came back, Elijah said, to do right. Renly leaned back, steepling his fingers. Do you believe you're fit to raise a girl alone? Elijah didn't hesitate. I know I am. There was a long silence. Then Judge Renly glanced toward the back of the room where the door creaked open. And in stepped Miss Alma Greer, dressed in her Sunday best, spine straighter than most soldiers. I believe, she said firmly, that if you deny this man, you deny the very decency this town claims to stand on. Renly blinked. You're vouching for him? I am. I saw that baby in his arms. I heard the way he says her name. Renly glanced down at the papers Rosalind Avery had prepared. Her name, you said. Elijah stepped forward. Wren, Violet Wren Boone. The judge studied him long and hard, eyes unreadable. You chose the mother's name. Yes, sir, because she gave her life to protect that child. And I want Wren to grow up knowing she came from strength, even if she don't remember her face. Another silence. Then the judge sighed. I remember you, Boone, angry, lost, looked at me like I was the last nail in your coffin. I was, Elijah said, but I learned how to build from broken wood. Renly's gavel struck the desk once. Sharp, final, guardianship granted, name recorded, file it with the clerk by sundown. Elijah didn't breathe until he stepped outside into the sharp spring air. Rosalind was there, standing beneath the sycamore, gloves tucked in her hand. You did it, she said quietly. She did it, Elijah replied, nodding toward Wren, now fast asleep in her sling. Joshua came up beside them, smile wide and silent, and Alma, proud in the background, nodded once as if to say, "You kept your promise." Rosalind reached into her satchel one last time and handed Elijah a small, cloth-wrapped package. "What's this?" he asked. "She left it in my care. Said to give it to you only when it was finished." He unwrapped it slowly. It was a hand-stitched quilt, faded reds and worn blues, letters sewn into each square with trembling thread. "Wren Violet Boone, may you never forget the man who stayed." Elijah ran a hand over the fabric. The last gift of a woman who had never believed she could stay but had made sure he would. First wildflowers came early that year. Yellow bells and white starweed pushing up through the thawed dirt like they'd been waiting for just this spring. The river had softened, trees shook loose their last patches of snow, and the wind, once cruel, now felt like breath from a kinder place. Elijah sat on the porch of the cabin, whittling a block of cedar into the shape of a bird, the scent curling around him like memory. Wren tottered on chubby legs just a few feet away, arms out for balance, face lit by the afternoon sun. She was walking, not steady yet but brave. So brave. Each step she took across that yard felt like a chapter closing, and another opening. Joshua stood near the fence, mending a loose rail, glancing up every now and then to watch her. Lila had come out too, just for a visit, bringing almond cakes and a new quilt square stitched with Wren's initials in green thread. Even Alma had sent a note tucked inside a jar of preserved peaches. A child loved by many never walks alone. Rosalind had left town quietly 2 weeks before, no fanfare, just a folded letter left on the porch rail. "Thank you for seeing her the way Letty would have wanted. I don't believe in ghosts, Elijah, but I believe in grace. You gave it." Elijah had read it twice, then burned it in the stove, watching the smoke rise toward a sky that finally seemed to hold no storm. Now, Wren stumbled a little in the grass, arms flailing, then dropped to her knees and giggled. Elijah stood, walked over, and lifted her gently, brushing dust from her little hands. "You're strong," he said softly, "and you don't even know it yet." She looked up at him, solemn, and pressed the silver button she always carried into his palm. "Bird," she said. He laughed. "That's right, a wren." He carried her down toward the willows, those old trees bending by the creek, where Cora once braided flowers, where Letty once sang without looking anyone in the eye, where Elijah had buried hope and dug it back up again with trembling hands. They sat beneath the largest tree, the one shaped like an archway, where wind and branches wove shadows that danced across Wren's cheeks. She leaned into him and sighed, tiny fingers gripping his shirt. "You came into this world wrapped in my coat," he whispered, "but you've wrapped me up too, in ways I never expected." He thought of all they'd been through, fires, courtrooms, strangers turned family, and here they were, not victorious, but whole. He looked toward the cabin, the place that had once been silent and still. Now there was movement, laughter, life. Wren's booties drying by the stove, a cradle pushed aside for a bedroll, a high chair Joshua had made by hand. She didn't just belong here. She was here, rooted, like the willows, growing. Elijah reached into his pocket and pulled out the second button, the twin to hers, worn smooth by years of waiting. He pressed them together in her palm. "Two of a kind," he said, "like your mama meant it that way." The wind stirred gently, rustling the leaves above them. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out. A horse nicked. The sun dropped just enough to make everything golden. Elijah stood, holding Wren close, and whispered, "Let's go home." And, together, step by step, they walked back across the field, where trouble had come and left, where love had been dropped like boots on a porch, and where, despite all of it, something beautiful had taken root. Sometimes, family isn't who you're born to, it's who shows up, stays, and chooses you, day after day. What does home mean to you? Tell me below. If this story touched you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you'd like more stories like this one, you know what to do.